Hello everyone and welcome to my very first Netrunner video. Now before I begin I'm going to warn you that I'm not going to be a world champion anytime soon. However, I can pretty much show you how not to play Netrunner. Maybe you can teach me a few things, or maybe we can all laugh at my misfortune and terrible plays. If you see my octagon, I go by sabre0001, not too fussy about which side I play usually, and today I'm playing Leela. This is my first time actually playing her. She's an interesting character that changes the way people play against Criminal, because as soon as an agenda is scored or stolen, she's able to bounce an unresed card back to the corpse HQ, so it makes it a bit tricky as to when you're going to res things, when you're going to actually score and so on. And this is the perfect game to try her out in, because NBN, they want to score that first Astro as soon as possible, but if they do, they may leave themselves unprotected against all the usual Criminal shenanigans. You can see the deck list that I'm using for this game in the description below as well. One of the key pieces of it, I think, is Keyhole. That allows me to pressure R&D, get a bit of multi-axis going on, and of course snipe when I need to snipe. As I see it and some economy in my opening hand, I decide I'll keep it. My opponent gets the two pieces of ice that they want to see in their opening hand, puts it over HQ and R&D as you'd expect, but for some reason draws a card on their last click, and if there's anything the Team Covenant have drilled into my head, it's that you never draw on your last click. Naturally, the criminal in me wants to check out what's in HQ, even more so after they drew on their last action. So I'm going to play the sure gamble, run towards HQ and see what I can find out. It turns out to be quite an informative run because I see Galahad, so that tips me that they're playing probably the full suite of Grail Ice. It's early days yet, so my opponent hasn't drawn any extra Grail Ice, but it's something that I have to consider, and it means that I have to rig up more because all of a sudden a code gate could trash a program, for example. It's no longer just a case of sticking down a Faerie and seeing what happens. I start this game very aggressively, as I do in many games actually now that I think about it, and I hit R&D next, which proves to be a very successful access, hit the Astro script, so I'm postponing that train a little bit. And I remember Leela's ability as well, I bounced that ice over R&D, this gives me a free next access on R&D, and it also means that my opponent just has to use a click to replace that ice. Not the worst thing in the world, but at least it's slowing them down a little bit. From my R&D access, I see a targeted marketing current, which of course my opponent decides to play against a count siphon on their next turn. So that's one criminal trick that I have to live without until I either score an agenda or play a current of my own. Naturally I don't play any of the run currents because most of them are pretty bad at the moment. Curiously, my opponent does not spend the action to re-res R&D, giving me free access, which with the Keyhole sitting in my hand is exactly the kind of news that I wanted. My main issue with Keyhole is that I'm not quite decisive enough for it. I'm never quite sure if I should be going for the ice to keep them weak or the agendas when I do see them. This is my second take at this commentary because I originally said that reversed accounts was never a consideration, and then I saw that I actually clicked on it. Not a misclick, just a misplay. On my next Keyhole run I'm greeted by the same two pieces of ice and a breaking news. Again, I have Sophie's choice going on. Which do I go for? Do I keep them weak? Probably should have gone for the breaking news now because it means that I could take out that current at the same time. Once again I'm unsure that I went for the right choice. Program trashing is more of an issue than damage really. On my final run, I feel like I got it more right. I finally clicked on Lancelot, third time's the charm, and if it's going to pop up that frequently, at some point it should probably go in the trash. My opponent goes for consolidation on their next turn, putting down a piece of ice in front of R&D just to stop the Keyhole bleeding. Targeted marketing is still in play, so a count siphon is less of an issue at the moment, even though it's only a Galahad in front of HQ. I should take my cue from my opponent and slow down a little bit, but instead I go for a traditional criminal approach. I throw down the Faerie and start running willy-nilly again. I've seen the Grail Ice at this stage, I know what it can do, and one piece is even staring me in the face as a reminder. Yet I still run knowing that I could lose programs or take damage. Thankfully it's just a toll booth, it nearly bankrupts my opponent, does take a chunk of change out of me as well, which I could have done without, but probably worse is the fact that it's now rezzed, which means that Leela's ability won't be able to fire on it when an agenda is inevitably scored. After my opponent spent a turn trying to build a remote server without really having the money for it, I decide that this is the moment to strike. I have my Corroder in hand, I throw it down, can click a couple of times for credit and hope, keep the fingers crossed, that they don't have additional pieces of Grail Ice. Sure enough they have the one, but I can break both subroutines and get my access, and unfortunately I just see a targeted marketing. Looks like I won't be playing any account siphons for the rest of this game. My opponent's next turn is a little bit more problematic for me. They start reinforcing this remote and they put a card at the bottom of it. If my opponent had 3 credits, I would be all over this like flies on honey, but because they can't score an Astro script on their next turn, I don't feel as concerned about it. This is a turn that I should just spend clicking for credits so that I'm ready to challenge the inevitable agenda score. Instead, I decide to draw, and I'm not entirely sure even now what I'm drawing for. Unfortunately, all this dithering around means that it's very easy for my opponent to install an agenda down below and get ready to start advancing it next turn. And my next turn is no more inspired either. Rather than challenging the remote and forcing my opponent to res ice or spend money, I instead faff around a little bit, click for a couple of credits, and then go for an absolute Hail Mary run, going for a 1 access, hoping that I hit an agenda so that I can bounce that card back. And shockingly, it does not work. My opponent gets a free Astro Script, although there did seem to be that temptation to leave it an extra turn. Part of me is very glad that they scored it when they did, because if they'd left it another turn, I would have been sickened to see it scored first and for all, and I would like to think that eventually I would have checked this remote server. This time I see sense when I'm bankrupt. I decide to click for credits and try to build myself back up. They have an Astro Script down, I need to find a way into R&D as fast as possible. My opponent is also quite poor, so it means that they won't be scoring agendas anytime soon. They try to solidify their position on the board, but they end up on 0 credits, so that upgrade is kinda going to waste. For my part, I see myself getting into a better position. I can finally use the sure gamble after clicking for a couple of credits, and the emergency shutdown will certainly come in handy. And this is my chance to strike. I finally have money, so I can get into HQ and start wrecking things. And what an access it is. I managed to get character assassination for a valuable 2 points. That takes targeted marketing off the table, and I managed to trash the upgrade as well. Not only that, but I make my opponent's day a little bit worse by shutting down the toll booth. So this will give me free reign, but I have to make a count. I have to be more decisive in what I go for with my keyhole accesses. And I do indeed make these ones count. On my very first run, I see the NAPD contract, so I will send that to the archives, even though I'll have to pay 4 for the privilege of stealing it. On my second run, I find the 1 pointer, and that means that all 3 points that I need to win the game are in archives. My opponent needs Jackson now more than ever. If they don't manage to find him, they lose. Simple as that. So this is it, moment of truth. My opponent installs assets down behind the remote server. But for some reason I like my drama, I like my suspense. I click for 2 credits, but rather than going for archives, I do another keyhole run just for the crack. Nothing there, so I keep the fingers crossed and run archives, and sure enough, I managed to pick up the 3 points that I need for the win. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, make sure you run archives as soon as possible. If they pop a Jackson, at least you can get into R&D again, and you can start the whole cycle once more. So thank you everyone for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again very soon for more net running.